What in the world possessed me to start a show about economics? I mean, let's face it, my knowledge of economics up to this point had been minimal. I was just living the only way I knew how. Poor. Hard to believe, right? Then, one of the most exciting years of my life happened. I traveled to the other side of the planet, I purchased my first commercial property, and I jumped out of a plane. But more importantly, I lost my job, as did half the country, had to move back in with moms, and I was probably at one of the lowest points in my life. I had no idea what I was doing. Sound familiar? You add in civil unrest, growing sickness, and division of America, and thus you have born EconRevolt. A place to build relationships, economically educate ourselves, and promote growth. When it's all said and done, we're just trying to make some changes for the betterment of our community.
All right, what a time to be alive. Hello and welcome to EconRevolt. I'm your host, Jamal, and we have here today Casey, who is a known Marxist, and we're going to talk about capitalism and socialism. We also got our co-host on the line, and that will be James Williams. James, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey, what's up to everybody listening? I really appreciate being on here. My name is James Williams. Really excited to be on the Al Jamal show with my boy Al Jamal himself, man. Looking forward to what's to come. Let's get to work.
All right, I think he gave me a little too much credit. The man said Al Jamal show. It's EconRevolt, by the way, but it's all good. I appreciate the shout out. So today we're going to try to understand capitalism and socialism. We have somebody who's very well spoken in both subjects. And it was recommended by James that we bring him on the show. So I had a conversation with him prior to this episode, and I think he was definitely the guy for the first episode. So Casey, we're gonna go ahead and let you give an intro and let everybody get to know who you are and what you do, and just kind of tell them a little bit about yourself.
So my name is Casey. I live here, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, beautiful city. I actually am. I have multiple jobs, so I come a little closer. Okay. But I have two jobs. I actually work out of Japan. But due to border restrictions, I'm currently stuck here working construction. So just another humble member of the working class, you know.
Okay.
But yes, I am. I'm a self-professed Marxist. I went to school with James, actually. He brought me in probably 2 months ago trying to talk to me to see if I would be willing to come on here and talk about it. So this has been something for him. I don't know how long you've known, but this has been something he's been planning for quite a long time.
So James kind of he with the okie doke on that one, huh?
Oh, yeah.
You've been playing this for months, I see.
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. Well, I'm glad he brought you on. So I gotta ask, Japan, what's up with that? What kind of work do you do as far as working overseas?
Oh, there's this program over there. It's called like the JET program. They take like a couple hundred foreigners, I think, every year from Anglo-speaking countries, so Britain, New Zealand, Australia, USA, and they have them go over there and just work alongside the Japanese English departments, teach kids English, because they have English programs over there.
Okay. Sounds like a heck of an experience. I think I actually had a friend that was into that, teaching English over there. Mm-hmm. So how long did you do that?
Oh, I haven't even begun to go yet because of the border restrictions.
Okay.
So I've just been coasting here for 6 months. I do online interaction with them. So
okay. So it's been virtual, obviously.
Yeah, I can do that, but in terms of me being on the ground there, I haven't even gotten to go yet. So
okay, so that's something to look forward to in the future.
Right.
Awesome. Okay. Well, shoot. I'm glad. Now that I know a little bit more about you, I'm glad that James actually was kind of right about bringing you on the show. So Casey, today we're going to talk about capitalism, or I would say understanding capitalism and socialism. It's definitely a huge topic that you see a lot on social media. As far as the show is concerned, we do a lot of lecturing videos. We do a lot of community growth experiments, or at least that's what we're getting into. So we're trying to find out what viewers need to know about capitalism and what they need to know about socialism. Things they need to understand, debunk some conspiracies out there if you can, and just kind of give everybody a little bit more idea of what capitalism and socialism is. Is it bad? Is it good? Should we be restructuring our systems? Give us your opinion on the matter.
So capitalism came about primarily in the Low Countries in England in the 1700s with the advent of the Industrial Revolution. So when, for the longest time, economic exchanges and controls were done on a very limited and restrictive basis with like feudal economics and, lords and manors and serfs. So labor, money, all of these things were restricted by the time that they were in. And capitalism basically came as a response to the growing wealth of the middle class in the 16 and 1700s throughout Europe. So capitalism, in a nutshell, just in its definition, is the free exchange of the means of production. So industrial manufacturing primarily, transportation, things of that nature, in private hands with the free flow of both capital, which would be money, and labor, which would be people. So,
So like if I was a regular guy off the street,
mm-hmm.
okay, and I walked up to you and I said, "Hey, what is capitalism?" What would be your first response?
It would be the private ownership of the means of production, so factories, industry, anything that produces something, in my hands or your hands, like an individual's hand, right? So he can personally own that factory and run and operate that factory, right? So the capitalist, if you say, will own and run that factory as an individual. That would be my answer to you is
Okay.
yeah, versus any other form.
And I guess we could kind of go ahead and take the detour down to socialism, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm a regular guy and I'm trying to understand socialism, because I'm scrolling on my news feed, on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I'm seeing all this thing about capitalism, all this thing about socialism, and I'm trying to understand like the difference between the two. So, what's a good description for socialism?
So socialism came about probably the earliest forms of it 20 to 30 years after the mainstream popularization of capitalism throughout Europe and its proliferation, right? So socialism, many people throw many different definitions out for it, and that's just a consequence of the world that we live in. However, its most basic definition that everybody can universally agree on is the ownership of the same means of production, so factories, productive forces, in public hands. Now, public hands is something that can generally be interpreted, but the most concise definition and the definition I will give you is the ownership of those means of production by the workers who operate them. So if you were in a factory, say for example, there's 10 people who operate like a shoe factory, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in a capitalist system, the capitalist would own that factory and thus by extension pay those workers a wage, and those workers would operate the factory and he would sell the products and that would make profit.
Correct.
In a socialist system or anything with public ownership, the people who work that factory would run that factory. Now that can take broadly different definitions. So those 10 people could come together and collectively operate that factory without an owner or without a manager, or they would elect their manager or their owner, or all of those different things. So it can take many different forms, but it is just taking away control of those means of production from a single individual or a handful of individuals that would be known as the capitalists and putting them in public hands.
Okay. Now, again, all that to me sounds like textbook descriptions, and you actually conveyed it very, very well. And I definitely understand exactly what you conveyed and how you conveyed it. So,
Mm-hmm.
Capitalism and socialism, is that not a mixture of what we live under in the United States of America?
Well, I would ask you, are there any factories in the USA? Are there any, transportation mechanisms in the USA? Are there any productive forces really in the USA that are run and operated by their workers? I can't really think of any. I'm sure that there are cooperatives and collectives that freely exist, but no major economic mechanisms exist in the USA for public ownership. There are very few. There are some willing ones, but there are not a lot. So no, I'd say that the USA operates definitely under a completely capitalist free market system. There are obviously restrictions and guidelines set in place because European countries and by extension the United States learned very quickly that the market
After the revolution, right? The Revolutionary
well,
War.
yeah. Well, not only just that, but in the 1800s, they learned very quickly that the unfettered growth of market economics didn't make the vast majority of people very happy. So they put restrictions in place to limit, obviously how far that market can go, really. So that's where you get, regulations, economic regulations, or social welfare programs, or things like that. But those are not necessarily socialist in nature. Some of them can be, but that does not necessarily constitute socialism. So, actually, the first country in the world to ever have a social welfare policy was Germany in the 1870s. And Germany was one of the most conservative and reactionary countries at that time in Europe. So it's mainly just a way of harboring down the excesses of what capitalism is.
So I wanted to ask you, and before I ask you, James, you still alive? You with us?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It was interesting to hear. Okay. Yeah, it was good. It was good to hear what Katie said. Yeah, obviously, the viewer doesn't know this, but we've had like long discussions about capitalism and socialism and like the elements of it. I would disagree a little bit. Um, like talking about the parts of regulations, I would say these were aspects of socialism. Now, I would say in Casey's case, he's more of like the truer of he's a very rare breed in the sense that like he is a very true Marxist. He understands Marxist ideology a lot better than most of these politicians do. A lot of politicians they like to spiel about like a lot of social stuff and they don't really know that much about it. So he's really more to the true hardcore definition of it. I believe over time as like society's evolved, I think the definition of socialism has evolved.
That goes into what I was going to ask you anyway, right?
Okay.
When I first started off the episode, I was going to ask you, what is a Marxist? How do you become a Marxist? And to help better understand, like if I'm a regular guy on the street, what do Marxists believe as far as the way the country is structured, how it should be structured, stuff like that?
Okay. So I think a lot of people innately make a lot of assumptions, and that is just a product of, one, the Cold War, and two, just the entire 20th century. It really muddled a lot of conceptual ideas for what isms are: capitalism, socialism, Marxism, fascism. People throw these around quite a lot.
They do. I hear it and see it so much, and I'm like, for me, I'm like, what is all this, right?
Yeah.
Not normal conversations like that happen in my immediate circles.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm like, okay, I want to be able to discuss these things with random people.
Yeah. So a Marxist, broadly speaking, is just someone who believes in the broad conceptual ideas of what Marx puts forward. Now, Marx, a lot of people make a mistake that Marx was ultimately pushing a political ideological narrative. Marx, at the end of the day, proposes a theory, what can be considered a scientific and a philosophical theory. And that theory is of history itself, that there are vast economic mechanisms that push history forward, right? So economic exchanges, you and me, have a store, you're purchasing from me, or you are working for me in some way, some kind of economic exchange is occurring between the two of us. And economic exchanges are the mechanism at which history goes forward. And one of those economic mechanisms is class struggle. So the people who own the productive forces and the people who don't, the people who operate them and the people who own them, right? And that contradiction between the two of them, as well as various economic mechanisms, pushes history forward, right? So a Marxist broadly believes in the economic transition from the beginning of time towards, I guess, spookedly the end, right, which would be communism. And that's the capitalism is pushing itself with inherent contradictions towards its ultimate destruction. And its reorganization by the working class into the first economic form that would no longer have class distinctions.
So, to translate,
Yes.
people are they have this fear of capitalism in a way that it will ultimately result in communism.
It is not a fear of capitalism. Like, I am a Marxist. I think a lot of people get it really confused. I have no gripes about capitalism. I don't have an issue with capitalism from a moral or an ecological standpoint or anything, like that, which a lot of people do. It's inherent contradictions within how it operates. will inevitably kind of collapse in on itself, and it will force people at some point to adopt the new economic mechanism, because it's not we are overthrowing capitalism because capitalism is bad or because it's wrong. It's because it is ultimately an untenable economic model, and that inevitably it will have to be replaced.
Okay. So, I mean, I can't disagree with you on that. Capitalism seems like it either caters to one side of the equation or one side of the balance scale, and the other side is just the main one that's supporting that. I guess that's kind of what Marxism or Marxists believe. Is that fair to say?
Broadly, yeah, it's difficult because the class distinctions that form under capitalism are ultimately part of the mechanism that will inevitably drive it to its destruction. That conflict between, I guess, broad rich and poor, as long as there is a rich and a poor and there's an economic mechanism pushing that, there will always be a struggle between them. So that is why inevitably the working class, so to say, and the socialist or communist future that many people are so afraid of, by Marxists is considered to be inevitable. So
what is the idea from a Marxist standpoint that the structure of an economy should be?
So Marxists are probably one of the most broad anti-capitalist forms you can believe in, because Marx himself,
anti-capitalism.
Yes, Marxists do not perpetuate, like Marx himself actually doesn't perpetuate what a future under communism or any of that would look like, or because he is ultimately at the end of the day an economist, and he is not a political ideologist. He does not explain to you what the future is going to look like. He's broad about it. He said that classless, stateless, moneyless societies, but he doesn't lay the groundwork for what you would see. Most people, when they identify communism, they're identifying what is later to become Marxist-Leninism. So that is what the most visible form of I guess Marxist economics is, because every state that you can think of from the Cold War, at some point that considered itself to be socialist or communist in its identity was broadly based off of Lenin's ideals, Marx and Lenin together.
So each economy has to have some sort of governmental restrictions or governmental adversaries that say, hey, you know what? We need to make sure that everybody follows these rules, these laws, and that nobody breaks them. What is a Marxist idea about that?
Well, the need for regulation of the economy is an inherently capitalist principle. So when you talk
in other words, y'all probably don't agree with that either, huh?
Well, regulating the economy, I'm sure there will be regulations and things like that, and you're talking in a socialist or a communist or future, whichever one of the two. However, when you're talking about the current mechanisms that we use to regulate the economy, like tariffs or subsidizations or bailouts or even just social welfare programs, because social welfare programs, in essence, are just bailouts for little people. So
when you say little people,
working class, okay. Us sitting in this room,
the ones that have to keep the pyramid,
the pyramid going.
Yeah, okay.
So when you talk about that, I mean, those are just inherent to the way that capitalism is, right? Because they push us into that triangle or that dichotomy, and that's why we need those regulations put in place. Without those regulations, class warfare would actually be a lot more apparent to people, because you can see it now. You talk about it with like social media and things like that. You talk about how capitalism and socialism is always this reverberating, constant discussion. That is with the mechanisms that we have in place. Back before those mechanisms weren't in place, and the 18 and the 1900s, class struggle was very, very apparent, and it was oftentimes very, very violent.
Seems like technology is only mutating these topics, right? It's, freedom of press and all that. People want to express themselves. They want to talk about certain things. They want to be heard. And sometimes in the midst of all that, they start jabbering about things that just don't really make sense or that aren't true, that aren't fact. So it's all good, Bubba. Matter of fact, we're going to go ahead and continue. All right, so this is actually a good question for both you and Casey, right? Do you believe that America has the best balance of systems throughout the world? Now, I know this could be a long, drawn-out response, so Again, talk to me like I'm a regular guy on the street.
I mean, yeah, does America have the best system in the world? I mean, to an extent, there's a lot of waste in America. That's the major problem. Like we waste, we have more access to resources, land, wealth.
Couldn't that be said for other countries as well, right?
Yes, but like not to the extent the U.S. Like we have an excess of everything. We have an excess of water. We have excess of food. We have excess of money. We have excess of people. Like we have excess, excess, excess. So I think because of that excess, you get a great product on paper, which is the U.S. But like when you look at the paper, and you look at the numbers, and you see things being wasted, and you see corruption going on, and you see and you see wealth not being distributed in a way that's fair and that's humane, like showing humanity to other people, then there are a lot of problems on paper. So no, on paper, no, I would say not, but in a way, yes, just because of the excess. I would probably say the best system in the world would probably be Germany. Now, Germany doesn't have the amount of responsibilities that the U.S. has, but Germany does have great distribution of wealth, and they have very competitive businesses. They have BMW, they have Adidas, like they have all these businesses that are able to compete with the U.S. And so I would probably say Germany in that sense, but on the U.S. on paper, just because of our excess and just the overall value of it. What about you, Casey?
All right, Casey, balls in your court, Bubba.
Um, if you wouldn't mind repeating the question for me one more time.
Yeah, no problem. Do you believe that America has the best balance of systems throughout the world?
I don't think that there is a balance. I think we have regulations, we have policies in place to restrict or inhibit capitalism in meaningful ways, but I don't necessarily think that's a balance. I think when you look at a lot of these social welfare states that exist in Western Europe, which really I guess would own the only other model for a developed country like the United States. Even they're not socialist, and many of them don't claim to be socialist. But on top of that, these states can only perpetuate the way that they live, those wealth redistribution policies. They can only do that off of the United States dime. We pay for their defense. These countries basically don't really, most of them, I'm not going to say all of them, but if you're talking about Germany, for example, because he brought up Germany, Germany contributes very little of its like overall military spending in terms of its budget, which is what allows them to perpetuate these very generous
Opportunity costs, right?
yeah, opportunity costs. So if Germany found itself in the situation it was in 100 years ago, Germany probably could not have afforded all of these generous wealth redistribution programs and things like that. So I don't necessarily think that what they have going on is a bad thing, because it's just an opportunity for them, just like we have our opportunities that have been given to us as well. I don't think it's a balance thing. I think the United States has been hitting its stride for a really long time, but at the exact same time, if you want to talk about balanced systems between socialism and capitalism, the People's Republic of China or Vietnam would probably be the closest you could see, because in the 80s they hit what was called Deng Xiaoping theory, and it was an economic theory that basically centralized planning, which was how a lot of these economies were run during the Cold War, had to be gotten rid of in place of market economics. But it wasn't the same market economics we have here in the United States. It was a very, very planned and very, very orchestrated mechanism of running an economy. So that would probably be the only systems in the world I would consider to be a fusion of both capitalist and socialist concepts. But at the exact same time, do I think the United States has a really good balance? No. But do I think the United States hits its stride? Absolutely. Absolutely.
Word. Hey, that's well put, actually. I think a lot of times, and including myself, you have these one side or the other. Pick a side, any side. So as long as you choose, right? You have one side that says, "Hey, America is the greatest country in the world. Could be a lot worse. We could be this country. We could be that country." And then you have another side that says, America has a lot of things that needs to work out. A lot of issues that is kind of overlooking, that it's not doing its due diligence and trying to fix these things. And these are why most of the conversations like this happen about capitalism and socialism, about what injustice, about free speech, about so many different things that I can label. I can go on a tangent of things that we feel like we could be doing better. In my opinion, I'm always going to look at things half full. Yes, America is probably one of the greatest countries we could grow up in and be born in and strive in. If you look at comparing to other countries, but does that mean that we should not still pursue the correction of certain things that probably shouldn't be? Absolutely not. I think both you and James put it very well. Especially you piggybacking off of the Germany thing, and then you alley-ooped it a little bit with why they were able to have the system that they have now. They don't spend as much as America does in defense. I don't think any country spends as much as America does in defense.
It's getting a little smaller. Like about 6 years ago, it was like the U.S. spent more than the next 20 countries. Now we only spend more than the next 10 countries. So I think everyone else is getting like a little bit concerned about the state of the world. But yeah, the U.S. is spending an awful lot of money on military. Are you guys good on that side? But yeah, I think that's a great point that Casey brought about China. China. A lot of people don't know this. China, at least until 2020, before 2020, China had been growing 10% of its economy every year for the last 30 years, which is like sort of unprecedented in the history of the world. So that's why we see all these things. Like if you just go touch anything in your room, you're gonna see made in China, made in China, made in China. A lot of the production that used to be here in the United States has been shipped overseas to China, and since they have 1.5 billion people, man, like they can just keep making they can just keep meeting this demand at the end of the day. So yeah, that's a great point about that though. Great point.
All right, gents, this is probably gonna be the final question of the episode.
I got one question. It might be the same question. Okay, yeah, Casey. I think our viewers would be really interested in this. I know that you told me that that you had a little bit of a hand in that war between GameStop, Reddit, and Robinhood. Can you like go into that a little bit, if you wouldn't mind?
Oh, he just put you on the spot. So he wants you. He wants you to. He wants you to go. He wants you to go into the whole GameStop thing and how, you know, you may have played a part in everything that happened with GameStop.
Well, yeah. I mean, I held stocks, a couple of them in this whole thing. I actually lost quite a bit because of the once the frenzy, I guess, had kicked off.
Wait, Casey, can you explain it, like for like people that might not be aware of it?
Sure.
Yeah, just a little bit too.
Basically, companies, one of the methods that companies invest in stocks, right? And you invest in that stock with the hope that it acclimates in value, right? That it grows and that you can gain that extra value. So it's always the statement, buy low, sell high. You want to buy into something very, very cheap and you want it to continue to rise in value.
That's stocks,
yeah,
right?
That's stocks.
You would be surprised at how many people don't understand that.
Yeah, it's a stock is just a portion of a company, a micro portion of a company. If that's in the stock price, at least used to be based off of the evaluation of their total revenue, their equity, all the things they hold, their money-making capacity, all their property, everything put together. Nowadays, there's really nothing that kind of predicts some stocks, and this GameStop frenzy is probably the greatest example of it. So another way you can make money on the stock market is what's called a short. So if you take out a short on a company, you're basically betting that company is going to decline in value, that it's going to lose money. So
you could actually put money in a stock because it's going to fail.
You could, yes. It's called taking out a short. So you say, if you take out a short on a company, you're saying this company is going to go down in value, and you can, I think, even predict the amount. And what these companies were doing, these big hedge funds, is they were taking out huge shorts on declining companies. So companies like GameStop, Nokia, or AMC, or all these other, like these companies that have for a long time have kind of been on the decline, they would take out these massive shorts, right? So they're basically screwing, for all intents and purposes, screwing these companies because they're already on the decline, and taking out this short is only further devaluing them. So the ingenious people over on Reddit figured out that they can manipulate the market just as well as the rich can. So they basically flooded GameStop, purchased a bunch of really, really cheap stocks. That influx of revenue blew up the stock price because you have millions and millions and millions of people buying tens of thousands of shares. And what happens is that value starts to shoot up, 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 up. And these companies have to buy back those stocks at that reduced price, which is how they make the money off of it. So then these stocks are you know, up $100, $500 a share when they were originally supposed to be $2. So then they have to pay back what they originally had thought. So then they lose the money.
So that's how that works. Okay.
Yes.
Well, obviously the companies that hold, you know, most of the stock,
Yeah.
it would be in their best interest to buy it back regardless if it's high or low.
Yeah, but like, so the companies that are shorting, they have an obligation to buy those stocks now because they shorted it. They went under the assumption that this was going to lose money, but they are obligated to buy back those stocks regardless, whether they go up or down. But the hope is that they go down so that they make money. So, but because it didn't just go up, it went up an astronomical amount. They did get into quite literally the billions when they were talking about money that they were taking away. Now, the government quickly came in. You want to talk about regulations on capitalism. The government quickly came in and was like, all right, shut this whole thing down. Right. So, but had that been allowed to continue and had companies like Robinhood or TD Ameritrade, or had they not shut this process down and just let it keep going, I mean, it would have, they could have quite literally bankrupted a couple multi-billion-dollar corporations that had
And the
been taking
government
on
had to
shorts.
make sure that didn't happen.
Yeah, pretty much. You
Save
know,
the big guys, even though the little guys are suffering.
Yeah.
Let me stop.
yeah, it's
So no, I mean, obviously, saving the big guys is supposed to help the little guys. It's supposed to make sure that the people that depend on these big corporations still have somewhere to go. The only problem with that is, you know, the dependency part. You know, I think America is definitely shifting into a culture that is or a structure that is not going to be something that you can depend on one job or two jobs or one stream of income or two streams of income. And I think that's why we see why we are seeing an influx of people getting involved in the stock market, essentially saturating it, if you will, right? Has the stock market always been saturated, or is it?
No. Playing stocks has traditionally been a game that requires a lot of knowledge about stocks. Because these valuations are based off of a number of things, which is why you used to be able to get like a Strat 4 subscription or like an Economist subscription or whatever newspapers or magazines talk about stocks anymore. I don't know. But you used to be able to get one of those and they would say, here are our best long-term 5-year stocks, right? You invest in this because of this, and this that we've calculated. We think that this is going to be its growth over a period of time. But for someone who gets by paycheck to paycheck, or for someone who really just isn't super concerned about their long-term financial situation, they don't go and invest the money that they have now into those stocks. It really was a game for people who were upper middle class, or stockbrokers, or just wealthy and wanted to perpetuate their wealth because you don't pay taxes on you know, a stock that you hold, right? So it's a good way to keep your wealth not only in a good place, but to keep it growing over time.
Increasing
it, yeah.
Doubling, tripling, sometimes quadrupling it, and even more, right?
Yeah, if you had taken, I had a friend who had 5 shares in GameStop. When he bought them for $25, he made $1,200, or not $1,200, $1,200, I think, $1,300 just off of overnight. It blew up. So I mean, imagine what would have happened if you were a rich stockbroker and it had gone and you had done it off of a normal market analysis, and then it had still blown up, and then you'd be talking a lot of
As a
money.
matter of fact, today the GameStop stock is just kind of going up and down right now. If you check it out on Robinhood, I was looking at it and it went down to 200, then it went to 262, and it's kind of like a wave right now on just on this one day. So that's pretty interesting. Actually, James and I have also talked about getting into stocks more. Obviously, everybody needs to kind of understand how it works, and that's going to be for another episode once we get a little more information or get somebody who has a little more knowledge on it, who lives, eats, and breathes it. That's a plan for the future. All right. So how can we progressively educate listeners on capitalism and socialism? Like many of us know, we live in a capitalist nation with socialist patterns. I'm not sure if you agree with that.
No.
You don't agree with that?
I do not agree with that.
Okay. Well, James would say that we live in a capitalist nation with socialist patterns.
James is free to be wrong.
So anyway, but how can we progressively educate listeners on just capitalism alone, knowing that we live in a capitalist society? We cannot deny that.
Yeah. Well, the big thing is, first off, you got to know your definitions. A lot of people, they like to make assumptions. Or they just do it based off of what they've experienced in their own life or what they've been told.
Some people only go off what they've been told.
Yes, you
And
could.
it's
You
not a
could
good
simply just
idea.
look it up. Like if you don't believe me, you could just look it up, and it'll give you the definition, and you can do your own research. But these do have very specific definitions and very specific ways of operating. I think for the best way for the average person is if they're going to throw it out at least correctly. They can at least give the correct definition. A lot of people will say, like James, though, socialism is just government regulation, or it is government wealth redistribution, or it is government involvement in the economy. That's not true. Government doesn't equal public. Those are not the same thing.
Government doesn't equal public?
Not in all situations. Not in the way that you're talking about socialist ownership of the means of production, because the whole idea about
Something called the public sector. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
you can call they have the term for it. It's the public sector. But like when we talk about public in terms of socialist economics, public means owned by the working class, quite literally owned. Now that's why you'll see many different mechanisms for how that works. But for the average person, what's most important is knowing the definitions, and being willing to open yourself up to it. If you live in a free market system, right? Like the stocks, right? And you're talking about the stock issue. It's not this enclosed mechanism, that is only perpetuated by rich people. Some of the people, I think about 100 people became multimillionaires overnight during this whole, stock fiasco, right? Plenty of people can go out and start businesses, right? So I think, at least for individuals, not only do you use the right definitions, but you can teach yourself what capitalism is by getting involved in it. You can open a business, you can participate in the stock market, you can do many things that would teach you what capitalism is. It might be a little bit more difficult to understand what socialism is. There's really not a whole lot of places left that you can experience it, but it's a different way of operating. But I think, at least for the average American, I think it's good to keep your eyes on the prize in terms of capitalism, because if you are a capitalist and you believe in the free market exchange, I don't think you should go day to day living paycheck to paycheck and focusing on
Absolutely not. I don't think anybody wants to do that. That's kind of not. We're not saying, hey, yeah, just withhold as much money as you can from me while I make a little bit of money just to make it to next week or next 2 weeks. I don't think nobody volunteers to do that.
Right.
Huh?
But if that's your way of living, and you do live like that, which there have been many points in my life as well. A good substitution to that is you can read. You can become educated on it, regardless of what your standing in life is, right? Knowledge is not something that is only belonging to the rich, is kind of what I'm trying to say.
Right.
You can be paycheck to paycheck, and you can still understand how this economy works. And
we could argue that since we depend so much on school systems and so much on societal expectations and societal, patterns, that we depend on school, or we depend on society to teach us these things. I think now we're realizing that we can no longer depend on the normal traditions of go to school, get your high school diploma, get your degree, and then you'll be successful. Obviously, that's not working for a lot of people. So to your point, being able to self-educate is very, very important. I have grown to love self-educating. It really is been a benefit to my entire life, which is why EconRevolt was born.
Yeah, I mean,
I encourage everybody to do the same.
Great.
So, James, your closing remarks on the matter?
So my closing remarks is just, I want to make it clear. I'm not a capitalist. I know Casey's making me out to sound like one a little bit, but I would just I would want to point out one important thing though, and that's what capitalism offers you. I would define capitalism a little bit differently. I would say that it gives the average person the opportunity to price things how you want, to make your own business, and then to hire who you want. No one wants to be told what they can do, what they can or they cannot do with their money. So like that's sort of the beauty of capitalism. A lot of the ugly parts get in with people, and how they twist the system in their favor.
EconRevolt does and still will participate in promoting a small-owned business for free every week, and we also will give economic tips of the day throughout the week, so look out for those. Casey, I really do appreciate you being patient with us, coming on being on the show. I think it was a successful first interview. I can't wait to do many more, and we'll be glad to have you back on the show.
Sure. It was a lot of fun. I
Yes,
enjoyed it.
Thank you. Remember, economists, if you don't get it, you don't got it.
I know some hustlers getting off on low aptitudes. They act with attitude, but rest the night with gratitude. You posting pics on vacation while thieves is mapping you. I know I didn't know much at first. I used to clock in and clock out to put in work. I used to pass on tight jeans so I could chase a skirt. But now I'm loving on a woman with a patient smirk. We all got something to learn.